Yay Networks.
I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. We are talking about something I am so excited about. I'm so happy to see it finally start happening, and that is food makers looking to trim added sugar from products on shelves. So we're going to be talking about a lot to do with this on this week's podcast, the reasons why this is happening. Why is it becoming more and more prominent on the radars of food manufacturers? What are some of the barriers to doing this? Because it seems simple. There's a lot of other even natural sugar replacers. So it seems really simple to replace that sweetness with a no sugar alternative, but it's really not that simple. There are a lot of challenges around it. And then what are all these different sweeteners that are being used, and what are the differences between each of them, and what's maybe the strong points or the good aspects of them? What are some of the drawbacks of them? Because these sweeteners are things that we're seeing on labels when we turn it over and we look at the ingredient list, but they're also ingredients that we'll find as single ingredients on the shelves in the sweetener aisles, especially at our natural food stores, that we can start using more and more in our own cooking and baking at home. And this week's guest, who is an absolute expert in the topic, so I'm so thrilled he's joining us, is Darryl Holliday. And Darryl is an associate professor of food science at the University of Holy Cross here in New Orleans. He is a senior level food and beverage professional with expertise in both culinary and food science, and his educational background focused on culinary art, also food science, as well as business marketing, nutrition, and organic science. He's got 15 plus years experience working in the food industry. He is my go-to resource for everything food science related. I call him, text him, email him with questions or ideas all the time, and he's always game to just dive in with me. And if he doesn't know, we'll explore it together, but usually he does know, and he is my go-to expert. So he's got a background in the food industry. He's worked with bakeries, fine dining, multi-unit chain restaurants, specialty ingredient companies. He's worked with product manufacturers that are producing finished products. His education and also his product development experience is what motivates him to bring, as a professor, to bring these real world experiences into his classroom. So he'll share with us some of the strategies and what he's incorporated into curriculum to ensure that students graduating from the food science program at the University of Holy Cross have such a well-rounded experience and education, and they're able to leave not just with the science knowledge, but also how to communicate it. And all of this also makes him the perfect guest for this podcast, helping to bridge the worlds of food science and everyday wellness. So with that, welcome, Darryl. I am so happy to have you joining us again.
I'm happy to be here again. Thank you so much.
So we're talking about sugar and added sugar and how the food industry is changing its approach to added sugar. But before we do that, share with our listeners a bit about your profession and what you do as a professor. Talk to us about the food science program that you lead over at Holy Cross.
Sure. Yeah. So as a food scientist, we really focus on the chemistry, the biology, and the physics of food manufacturing and food safety being a high portion of that. And in the time of COVID, obviously food safety is being a big issue, especially in manufacturing, not just the safety of the food, but the safety of the employee as well. And so we're trying to bring that into the classroom, and we try to give our students the real world setting so they have the opportunity to make products, sell the products at farmers markets. And the students really are embracing the learning aspect of the hands-on learning. So they're learning the theory as well as the hands-on application.
And making a product, basically, it sounds like they're coming up with a product concept, making it almost like, quote, bringing it to market, seeing it come to fruition in whatever type of packaging or whatever it's going to need to be sold in. And then by selling it at the farmer's market, they're actually learning a completely different skill of like interfacing with the public. And how do you take what might seem complex or they've been talking about in a lab environment and you're talking to the public about it?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've really pushed for, is to make sure that they understand that it's a completely different setting when you're talking to a peer versus when you're talking to the public. And that's one of the things that we push for to make sure they know the difference and they're able to communicate to all different markets.
Well, that's why I love having you on this podcast, or just, you know, turning to you as an expert in general, because anytime we're talking about a topic, you and I have done stuff on the alkaline waters, and we've done stuff on all types of things. Like anything that I see that I'm like, okay, this looks a little shady. Let me ask Darryl what he thinks, or whatever it is. You take something that can be really science heavy and you break it down into a way that is not only easy for someone to understand, it's also entertaining for them.
Well, thank you. I try to be entertaining, if not to the consumer, at least to me.
Right.
But that's one of the things that I feel is a strong skill set of mine, is that being able to communicate the food science and what we do, and show that the world of food science is not scary and it's not people making food in a lab, but it's really trying to make the best quality food for the best price for the best consumer.
And one of the things you do with the students, part of the curriculum, you've built in 3 courses that are centered on basically public speaking for that, and kind of the different realms, speaking to the public, but also speaking to peers, or how they would present out at a scientific conference.
Right. So they take a general public speaking course where they learn the different types of speeches, whether it's a wedding toast or a progressive speech, trying to promote different topics there. And then they take 2 that are specific to food science. One where they learn, as you stated, they learn to present to their peers in a scientific manner. Then they take a second one, which they focus on learning how to present to non-food science people, both in a business setting and in a public setting.
That's incredible, because that's something that, again, we get, we can be so stuck in our own heads. And we've got, especially if you're taking something that is science-based and they're talking to students, or they're talking to their professors all day, then when you're going to go home and talk to your grandma about it, it's a totally different way to communicate.
Yeah, it really is. And so we're very blessed that the administration of the university really believes in the education program that we're doing for these students. And we're seeing that the students are buying into it, and we're seeing our numbers increase, which is great. So we're seeing a lot more people being able to have this quality skill set. And we're seeing companies appreciate the caliber of students coming out of our program, and they're reaching out to us before students are graduating, trying to hire them.
It also shows that you guys care about the students as a whole person, and that student feels very, I'm sure, taken care of, because these are, something like a wedding toast that has nothing to do with food science, but it's helping them as that whole person, which, whether they're acutely aware of it, maybe if they're in their younger 20s, as a lot of the students maybe not, but you still know that you're being taken care of as that whole person, and not kind of just being pushed through this program. So I love that y'all are doing that.
Yeah, it ties into the university mission of educating the mind, but not at the expense of the heart. So it really focuses on that whole person mentality.
I love it. On the things that you guys do, y'all do food analysis testing. And so, like, when we've had products that need to be lab tested, there's certain things that you can't figure out a nutrition breakdown just by a recipe. And those might be things like fried foods or something like that. And so Darryl and the students actually have the lab analysis. And so they can, where we might do it with a recipe, like from the recipe, y'all are actually breaking it down in the lab to determine moisture content, but also calories, carb, fiber, etc. And then you'll also do things like test for if something has gluten in it. You do shelf life testing. Like, there's a whole host of types of things that y'all do in the lab.
Yeah, we basically call that our extension and outreach that we do. And it's great for the students because we bring that into the classroom. So one, it's a way to generate a small amount of funds for the program. But on the second side of it, and the most important side, is it gets the students involved in these food testing and really showcases that what they're learning in the classroom has a real world application. And it gives them more experience in performing these different testing methods.
And we've talked about our Eat Fit King Cake before on this podcast, and I'm sure I've mentioned it, but as we got bigger and as we were expanding, and the reach was going from just local sales in the New Orleans area to crossing state lines, going from Texas to Florida, we turned to you for the analysis and said, okay, we've had the batch recipe of this. We've done the analysis. We're pretty sure this is what the numbers are: calories, carb, protein, fat. Just this is what we do all day, every day, is recipe analysis of things. But to just verify that and get that independent lab test that we could, we knew that what we were saying it was as this was growing. And then you guys also tested to certify it gluten-free, which
Correct,
it was. And then shelf life testing. And so y'all do it to where we were able to say, you said, hey, it's cleared, I believe it was a 14-day shelf life.
Yeah, 14-day thawed, correct, shelf life, correct.
And then so we told retailers 10 days to just kind of give a little bit of wiggle room, in case they pushed it. But that was really invaluable information to us. And then we had one retailer that said, hey, what's it frozen shelf life for over a year? So you're currently
Yeah,
storing some of those to
yeah,
test.
we currently have them in the freezer, and we're pulling one a month and performing a texture analysis and micro analysis on it to make sure that the product isn't staling and getting freezer burnt, and then making sure that the product is safe for human consumption still.
Great. And will it tell us quality or mostly safety at that point?
The texture analysis gives us a little bit of information on
Yeah.
quality, because it talks about, or it shows us data on the crumb structure, and that will give us a quality standpoint of whether it's freezer burn, whether it's staling, or if it's still the same as when we originally froze the product.
That's fantastic. And thank you in
Of course.
advance for that. Yeah, that's really cool. Let's take a minute to talk about Coastal, one of our sponsors for this week's episode. So, you kind of want to buy glasses or sunglasses online, but you're worried about how they'll actually look, right? Coastal makes it so easy. You can browse and try on hundreds of frames from wherever you are instantly. Coastal has this really cool advanced virtual try on technology that is also a blast to use. I love that there's not a need to upload a photo of your face. Instead, with Coastal, you can try on frames just by using your phone or computer's camera. And it also gives us the option to turn frames into sunglasses, testing out the different colored lens tints with just a click of a button. At coastal.com, you can get prescription glasses starting at $9 with free shipping and 60-day risk-free returns. Just go to coastal.com, pick the frames you want, enter your prescription details, and your glasses will arrive in just a few days. Now and for a limited time, they're offering Fueled listeners the best deal they have going anywhere. That's 30% off of your first pair of glasses at coastal.com/fueled. Get free shipping, 60-day risk-free returns, and 30% off at coastal.com/fueled. Discount is applied at checkout. It's only for a limited time. That's spelled coastal.com/fueled. Some restrictions apply. So, shifting over to kind of the topic at hand today of how the food industry is changing its approach to added sugar. This is a good thing. I mean, I do think it's ultimately a really good thing that food makers are finally looking for ways, it's on their radar to cut back and dial back added sugar.
Yeah, I think with the new labeling law that companies have to declare added sugars now, that companies are really starting to look at and realize that corn syrup and sugar, while they're great bulking agents from a food manufacturing perspective, that they're not the best from a health perspective. And so now they're definitely looking at the different alternatives on the market.
And most of our listeners are probably aware, but share what the new label is, and when it went into effect, and kind of why that is affecting things now.
Sure. So the label went into effect in 2021, and
Was it January 1 of this year?
It was January 1st of this year.
So listeners may have seen added sugar before then, because it was voluntary for companies for the past year and a half.
For the past 2 years, it was voluntary as companies were starting to transition over. But all new labels printed after January 1st, 2021 have to declare added sugars on the nutritional label. So now if you look on the back of a product, you can actually see how much added sugar is in there. And it really compares the difference between a cereal bar or a candy bar versus a piece of fruit, where a piece of fruit naturally has healthy sugars in it, but the candy bar and protein bar, things like that, a lot of times have added sugars.
Or I think yogurt is a great one, because you might have some of the natural milk sugars there in the yogurt, and so people would say, "Oh, that's got 6 grams of sugar." Well, then now you can see, 0 of that is added sugar in your Greek yogurt. But then some of those that are 28 grams of sugar, 23 of that was added. So the takeaway on this is you want that added sugar really as close to 0 as possible. So that's one big reason food manufacturers are starting to be aware. They want their numbers to improve, and they've known this is coming for a while, but now the numbers are going on the label and consumers are looking at it.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely been a push by consumers for it, and there's been a push also in by members of the food industry, as you said, with the yogurt, really trying to compare, making it easier for consumers to compare apples to apples instead of trying to compare apples to oranges. Like
Right.
you said with the Greek yogurt, 0 added sugar versus 23 added sugars make a big difference.
Right. And the companies that have that quality product, they want to be able to differentiate themselves and not kind of be lumped in with the others. The other, I think, big reason that it started to come into the food makers, I guess, radar is last summer of 2020, the dietary guidelines come out. There's new dietary guidelines every 5 years, and the committee last year, which was the a committee of experts assembled to really, go through data, go through research, and make their recommendations for the 2020 dietary guidelines, which always come out the year later. They came out in 2021, essentially,
Right.
but so they're always a year behind. But the committee recommended that the new guidelines should actually call for more stringent parameters around sugar. So the old dietary guidelines said not more than 10% of our calories from added sugar. This committee of experts said it needs to be 6%. And so that we thought that was going to go into effect. Food makers were like, oh my gosh, like I've got to really go into high gear here. Talking about that for a second, I was highly disappointed that when the actual guidelines came out right at the end of December, they didn't take that advice. They kept it 10%.
Yeah, I think there really wasn't really enough time for consumers to educate consumers on the difference, but also to give manufacturers time to change labels. So I think we'll see that change over time. But I think right now we're going to see it's easiest for the industry to stick with the 10%. But as a consumer, it's really important that you know that mindset that it should be 6 to 8% instead of the 10%.
So Daryl's always nicer about things than I am. What I've realized when we have conversations before, I'm like, oh, like I get all frustrated. And I think that I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist in some things. I'm like, I think it's I do. I think it's like the sugar lobby. I think it's the sugar industry lobbying for this is part of it. And I think that there's a lot behind that. Darryl thinks that most come into it with good intentions and they do not come into it with intentions to harm us through our food. And I'm like, they're doing it because it's cheap. It's the ingredient, the lobbyists.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, food manufacturers really do want to do the right thing. There are some people out there that are making products that are really just out for the profit and not for the consumer. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the consumers, and educated consumers make decisions with their dollars,
Right.
and they vote with their dollars. And so if they're buying products that are high in added sugars versus products that are low in added sugars, then companies are going to keep adding the added sugars.
But when they get that request, I guess sort of like we saw the giant influx of gluten-free products onto the market is because, a small percentage of the population was a very vocal percentage that said, we need these products, and companies listened and they started churning out these or identifying if they were gluten-free. So by us as the public saying, hey, we want these lower sugar options, becoming much more aware of what the benefits are of limiting sugars, which we've talked a lot about it on this podcast before, but just to say it, I mean, there's so much sugar, and especially these added sugars, they're pro-inflammatory, so they can lead to inflammatory diseases, which we think about things like arthritis, but also things like heart disease, cancer are rooted in inflammation. The emotional ups and downs that we have from a high sugar diet, the effect that it has on our mood, a whole host of things that well beyond just obesity and diabetes.
Right.
So there's so many reasons, which this, we won't go down that path on this podcast, but there's so many reasons to limit it. And so for that, I was disappointed that they didn't take that advice to bring I feel like it's like a chicken and an egg thing. And I think that's where I think you're too nice about it. Because like, okay, the food makers don't have enough time to adapt and start to cut it. But I feel like put that policy in place and the food makers are almost forced to then adapt, but are they going to adapt when that policy is not in place, So
Yeah, I think it comes down to the consumer. If the consumer is asking for it, as you stated with the gluten free, then the food companies are going to make those changes. Just as you see the increase in people looking for the low carb lifestyle and the increase in cauliflower based or
Right.
vegetable based products, that it does come down to what the consumer is going to buy,
Right.
and the consumers make that choice. And so it really that's the hand that forces the industry.
You're absolutely right. And my husband, so we were actually on vacation when the new dietary guidelines came out. Like this was like right after Christmas. The other one that I'll say while I'm on my soapbox about it that I was really annoyed by is they gave this committee also gave very specific guidelines about alcohol consumption. And, there's a lot of science showing that, the current levels can still be harmful in some ways. And again, certain things like cancer, other conditions are directly, cancer, cardiovascular disease, directly linked to this. Yet the dietary guidelines didn't take that advice either. So I was like just really irritated when they came out. Not really irritated. We're still on vacation, but I was bitching a bit about it. I was like, God, look, the added sugar didn't change. They didn't change this on the alcohol recommendations. And Brad goes, Molly, who is even looking at the new dietary guidelines? He goes, my dad has no idea that the new dietary guidelines came out. This is Brad's. And he's like, the average consumer has no idea what those guidelines say. But I was like, however, the dietary guidelines are used to set policy for schools, for meals there, for what we're talking about in this podcast, like industry. But I think that you're right that while those dietary guidelines might be in place and they can help move the needle in the industry, what really moves it is what we as consumers are asking for.
Exactly.
So if you're listening to this and you want those lower sugar ones, send that note to those products. Let them know if you appreciate the changes they're making. If you see something that you love and you wish they had a lower sugar option of it, like Noosa. Oh my gosh, Noosa is so delicious, but they don't have a no sugar option for Noosa. Maybe I'll let them know.
I say push it.
Push it, because that stuff is good. Yeah. So anyway, back onto the topic of added sugar and talking about with this greater focus, the greater scrutiny that's around added sugar. We talked about kind of the two reasons why above these new dietary guidelines. And then again, the conversation last summer that it should be even tighter. So with that, and as we talked about, the consumers asking for it more. So when companies are looking for how are they going to do it, how are they going to dial back added sugar, it's not easy for them. And I think as the consumer, we think it can be easy. Oh, we'll just replace it, put something else in there, use stevia, or use, as the consumer thinks that it might be a lot easier than it is. But there's actually, for the food manufacturers, talk to us about what some of these barriers are, why it's so hard for them to make this change.
Well, sugar plays a really vital role in a lot of food products because of the nature of sugar itself, whether it's the crystalline structure, whether it's the bulking agent. So these are very important aspects in food manufacturing. And to just try to lower the sugar or to remove it completely, it requires a complete replacement of that. And unfortunately, there's nothing on the market that really behaves 100% like sugar. So what you're seeing is you're generally seeing a lot of blends being added. And at the same time, consumers want a smaller ingredient panel.
Right.
So the industry is trying to say, okay, well, we can give you sugar, which is a very easy to recognize, or we can put these more complex names on the ingredient deck and nutritional label. So they're really trying to balance both sides of it. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to the hardest part is trying to work without the physical properties and chemical properties that sugar provides to food manufacturing.
So to that point, sugar sweetens. And so I think as our listeners are listening, it's like, well, okay, it sweetens. But beyond that, it also gives bulk. It adds that bulking agent. It adds moisture to a product. In baked goods, it gives that caramelization of that. It gives the texture, the mouthfeel. There's with ice cream, it has to do with if that ice cream is going to freeze up into kind of rock solid or not. The sugar would affect that.
Right. Yeah. And that's the sugar crystallization factor. And it plays a role in, as you were saying with ice cream, in that it's the texture, it's the freezing, it helps prevent ice crystals. So there's all these important aspects that sugar plays a role. And there are other ways to modify it, but at the same time, they're trying to make the product affordable. They're trying to make the product taste the same. And sweetness, as you stated, that's probably the easiest
to mimic. So what are some of the other things that people don't think about? So ice cream, like you were saying, the crystals, the mouthfeel, the texture, but like in something like a cookie or a brownie or some of these other things, like what is the role of sugar beyond sweetness that we don't even realize is happening in that product?
Sure. So in sweet, sugar acts as a way of shortening gluten. And so if you put sugar in the product, you actually get a finer crumb. And because of that, you get that nice the softness and moistness of brownies. You can get with the varying amount of sugar and fat, you get the crispness of a cookie or the chewiness of a cookie. So there's really these really important roles that sugar plays.
I didn't realize that sugar impacts how gluten functions in a food.
Yeah. So the whole idea with mixing is the sugar basically gets in the way of the gluten molecules, really forming these long chains like we see in bread. So in bread, we have a little bit of sugar to get the yeast activated, and to add a little bit of sweetness to the bread, because bread without sugar actually is not very pleasant. But if we add enough of the
And it's the
sugar,
smallest amount in bread, of course. Yeah.
right, and but with brownie or something like that, we want that fine crumb. So it's really just a matter of stirring it in, get enough to get the sugar dissolved.
So that's why when I've had like, clients in the past have proudly brought me, maybe a cookie they made that had all the normal ingredients of a gluten containing flour, but they used something like whatever sugar replacer. And this is even in the days before the plant based ones. They would just make like a Splenda sweetened cookie. And it's so spongy and the texture is awful. And that's because the gluten was not shortened, I guess. And it's really given what I'm perceiving as sponginess might be a toughness of that gluten in there.
Right. Yeah. So the sponginess, the toughness, but also you're losing the sugar crystallization. And so within that crystallization, that plays a big factor in texture.
Yeah.
And so, as we said, like it's with a cookie, you want that high sugar content to give you that crispiness. But in a brownie, you want the chewy fudginess. So it's really product dependent upon what's the best way to remove the sugar, whether it's just reduce the sugar or look at sugar replacers.
So as you said, replacing the sweetness is the easiest part. As Daryl describes these cookies and these brownies, I think everyone listening is like, cookies, brownies. Like you make them sound so good as you're just talking about the properties of them. It also makes you realize why it can be so hard when you're baking with the alternative or other types of sweeteners. So for food makers, I think you made a really great point also that people want what we refer to as a clean label. And there's some people who are just like really militant about this and don't eat anything that you can't pronounce. Well, some of these very natural plant-based sweeteners that we'll talk about have long names and they're not easy to pronounce, but they're not, this lab frankenfood.
Right. Yeah. They sound very scientific names, but at the end of the day, they are, as you stated, they're all natural compounds that are safe and they do provide a benefit.
It's almost like maybe they could get like a little PR makeover. You know how like prunes tried to like position themselves as dried plums?
Yes. Yeah.
Like maybe if some of these names had like a different one, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. But that's my idea. But it is a battle of that because people they turn it over and they'll say, I don't recognize this or this is Franken food and it isn't. But as you said, it drives me crazy because there are certain people I like I'm not on social media a ton, but if I see any of these that I happen to follow for whatever reason, I'll unfollow because the idea that you have to be able to pronounce everything that's in your food. There was one that was Banza chickpea pasta, which is basically chickpeas, a little bit of xanthan gum, I believe. And it's just like super basic ingredients. And someone was bashing Banza. And I'm like, so what? Your alternative of a clean label that you can pronounce is the flour and water and salt of regular pasta, like white flour and water, like that quote clean label. It's short. It's not healthy.
Right. And this is one of those times when science is your friend. Even though you can't necessarily pronounce the food item or the term seems familiar, or you can pronounce it, but it seems different and not familiar, that it really can be a scare factor. But all these products have been tested for safety. And so they're not out to get you. The food industry really is trying to follow the trends as best they can. And so they look for ways to meet the demands of the consumer in the best way possible.
So as we look at the different types of sweeteners, there's, I guess, where should we start? Because like, I guess maybe if you can talk with us about the different types of sweeteners, like, and how they compare to sugar and how they sweeten. So there's sugar, and then there's high intensity sweeteners that are kind of the plant-based naturals, like, and we can talk through those. And then there's low intensity. So talk with us about these different sweeteners and especially talking about the natural plant-based sweeteners, so we'll be talking about the erythritol, allulose, monk fruit, stevia that we're seeing.
Yeah. So when we talk about a high intensity sweetener, what we're really talking about is anything that's 150 times as sweet as sugar or more. And so we see things like you said, the monk fruit, the stevia, these are high intensity natural plant based sweeteners. the stevia coming from the stevia plant, monk fruit coming from the Chinese monk fruit, which has been used for centuries in sweetening both the stevia and the monk fruit, but now finding ways to commercially produce enough for food manufacturing at the same time versus our low intensity sweeteners. These are ones that are closer in terms of sweetness to sugar as a one for one substitution. So really, we try to stay within the 70 to 120% when we talk about low calorie or low intensity sweeteners.
And those would be erythritol, allulose.
Right.
Are there others that you would put in that?
There's xylitol. There's all of your sugar alcohols, your maltitols, your sorbitols. Then there's really those are really the main focus with the. We also see trehalose, which is a new sweetener coming on the market, or new sugar coming on the market. So there's all sorts of opportunities there that, as we discover more information, that we're finding that certain sugar replacers have really unique properties, and manufacturing and food manufacturing as a whole are able to embrace those trends.
And it struck me as you were talking because the high intensity sweeteners that you're talking about, stevia and monk fruit, when we say they're high intensity, they're at least 150 times sweeter than sugar. They're so intensely sweet. They're very small and compact. And so if you were going to use enough stevia or monk fruit to serve as a sweetness for sugar, they're very small. They don't give the bulking, and they're not giving all the other stuff that sugar does. Whereas something that's more of a 1-to-1 ratio, like an erythritol or allulose, you can use that more. They're bulkier because they are lower intensity. You have more volume of the product, and it's not hitting you so much.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's how the product functions technically. So it's whether the flavor profile hits you in the beginning or the end, and whether the product crystallizes the same way, whether it goes through what's called a reducing sugar and allows for the product to brown and caramelize. So all of these have to play into a factor. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of manufacturers going towards blends of these for sugar replacers, as opposed to trying to find a single magic bullet.
Let's talk to, as we get into these, if you can kind of hit on the properties of each like that as we go. But what struck me as you were saying the names. So as we're talking about those high intensity sweeteners, stevia and monk fruit, those are very simple names. Oh, monk fruit. What can be wrong? But there's nothing harmful about monk fruit, and there isn't. But then if you say erythritol, allulose, these others, it's like that's where they start to sound real sciencey. So they kind of got the short end of the stick as it came to the naming on those.
Yeah, they really went with more of the scientific naming. Monk fruit came around as the English translation of Lohan Go, which is where it comes from, the Chinese name for it. And it's been used by monks for centuries. And so that's really where they took the name monk fruit from. But with the low intensity sweeteners, the allulose, the sorbitols, they really went with the scientific name on them, and that really affects their marketing.
Yeah, it really does. And I think to that point too, before we get into the others and kind of go through specific ones, there's people think sugar alcohols, they really upset my stomach, and many people experience that with sorbitol, maltitol, mannitol, lactitol. These are all those are some that can just be just a raging disaster on people's bellies. But we should point out that erythritol has a milder effect on GI, and allulose it can still have an effect on people's GI systems, but probably not quite to the extent as a sorbitol, maltitol.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it side by side, if someone was to consume large amounts of sugar that they're not used to, if they are not used to consuming large amounts of sucrose, then they would have an upset stomach as well. So anytime you switch sugar and take a large amount of it, you're going to see some dietary or some stomach upsetness from it.
So if you are new to switching to these sweeteners, start small and don't go wild with it. Yeah, which can be hard. Sometimes someone's baking with it and then they really like what they baked and then they gobble it all up and they're like, oh my gosh. So pace yourself, even if you're using the natural plant-based sweeteners. Let's talk for a minute about Billy, sponsor of this week's podcast and an Allure Best of Beauty winner. Self-care and routine are more important than ever. So whatever you're using to get ready for the day should make you feel amazing. Billy has recreated everyday essentials by delivering premium razors and high-performing body care directly to you. Go to mybilly.com to get their starter kit for just $9. That includes their award-winning razor, 2 refill blades, and a cult favorite magnetic holder. I love Billy's products, and you will too. They leave our skin feeling so soft. And to express a little love for our show, go to mybilly.com/fueled. It's a small way that you can support us while also getting the best razor you will ever own. It's just $9 to get your starter kit plus free shipping always. Go to mybilly.com/fueled. That's spelled mybillie.com/fueled. So also there's a good website, and tell me what you think of it. It's Center for Science of the Public Interest has chemicalcuisine.org, where they have tons of different products, not just sweeteners. I mean, hundreds of different compounds, and they list them, they rank them as if they're safe or cut back, caution, making sure before we go into that more that, do you agree? You like the site or?
Yeah, I think it's a great site. It's fully based on science, and they do update it as more information comes out. So it's a really great reference for people that are not necessarily working in the food industry every day.
So I'll link to that. So if you're curious about these or looking or really any product or ingredient that you're seeing, going back to that conversation of I don't know what this word is or it's not familiar to me, whether I can or can't pronounce it, it's not something that you would normally have in your kitchen, then you can go to this site, chemicalcuisine.org. Center for Science and Public Interest, they have a monthly little publication called Nutrition Action that is, I think it's fantastic. They don't take any money from industry. There's no ads in there. So they are truly just coming at it from a science-based, they're not influenced by the industry here. So that can give you some specific insight on those. Also say, if you are looking at that, you would notice that in the avoid or don't use category, that's things like aspartame, which is equal, sucralose, which is Splenda, saccharin, which is sweet and low, and then asulfame potassium. That's one that a lot of people aren't familiar with. You don't really know what that is, but it's what's in Coke Zero. It's just, so all 4 of those, aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, and asulfame potassium, are all what is considered artificial sweeteners. They're not in the plant-based natural category that we're talking about mostly today. They're in the category that I would agree, avoid them. They've been shown to cause cancer in animal studies. There's other side effects that people will have, but I would specifically say as much as possible, try not to have these. And so companies, which we'll talk about in a bit, but food manufacturers are often using a blend. And so they may use a blend of monk fruit, which is a great natural plant-based sweetener, but then they're also adding in asulfame potassium or they're adding in sucralose. So even if on the front of a label you see sweetened with monk fruit and you're like, oh, great, turn it over because they're going to brag about that on the front. And then you also may see it's got other stuff in it. So that would just kind of be my caution is those 4, aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, asulfame, potassium, avoid them. You can see more at chemicalcuisine.org. And we won't be talking about those. We'll be talking about the natural ones. So as we're looking at those, Darryl, if someone's like, okay, I want to start incorporating these and we can now buy them to keep in, just like you would buy sugar to keep in your pantry, you can buy allulose or erythritol or any of these. And we've talked about Swerve a lot on the podcast before. We've had Ben, who works with Swerve, talk about low carb baking with it and stuff. But that's an erythritol-based product. So walk us through kind of the different properties of them. Like you were talking about, the lingering sweetness, or it leaves us quick, it leaves us fat, or slowly.
Sure. So one of the great things about sucrose is it's a very upfront sweetness that doesn't linger very long. And so it doesn't sit on the tongue. So you can really experience all of the flavors, all of the aromas coming off the product. Whereas stevia, on the other hand, is very back forward. So it's going to not be very sweet up front, but it's going to be very long lasting back sweetness.
What do you mean back sweetness?
So it's where it's on the back of the tongue, and it's where when you're eating something, it takes a while for that sweetness to develop.
And that would be stevia specifically?
Right.
And does it last for a while? Does it linger for a while?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest problems with stevia and things like monk fruit is that you get that long lasting sweetness, and it can become a little bit cloying if you're eating too much of it.
Yeah.
And that's why some people are like, oh, I don't like stevia. Oh, I don't like monk fruit. Generally what they don't like is that they're actually consuming too much. And so the first few bites of a product might be well balanced with the stevia, but because it's so back forward and lingering, that you start to build this intensity up, and that intensity becomes overwhelming.
And it's what they would consider an aftertaste.
Correct.
Okay. So that's with stevia. Which one would you walk us through next?
So I think erythritol is probably the next choice, because we're seeing it a lot more places in the food industry. Because one, it doesn't have as much of the GI upset as we talked about, but it's a low intensity sweetener, so it's not as intense as sugar. So we can add a little bit more than we would for sugar. We get the bulking agent, but in flavor profiles, we seem to find that it's a very even one for one match. In that, while it doesn't give the exact same flavor spike that sucrose does, the lasting effect, it's a front forward sweetener, and we don't get that build up aftertaste.
And we should also share with our taste test that we did just before this podcast. I have bags all over the counter. That is, we had a sampling of allulose, monk fruit, erythritol, some stevia blends, and we taste tested each of these. And I think as you have them side by side, I find that erythritol is the most neutral. Like it doesn't hit you. It doesn't have a strong like hit into your mouth. It's pretty neutral.
Yeah, I think erythritol in terms of the sugar alcohols is the most neutral. Then we're seeing a lot more increase with the use of allulose, which is a very neutral flavored sweetener. And so we're seeing that allulose is one of those that people might identify as, oh, I'm not familiar with what it is, but
Right.
it's a natural sugar. It's found in plants, and it's a great alternative to sugar because it doesn't necessarily add to the total added sugars on a nutritional label.
So how would you differentiate allulose and erythritol? How are they similar? How are they different? And again, we'll say erythritol, if you're familiar with Swerve, erythritol is the primary sweetener in Swerve. And what you and I tried of the allulose was actually an allulose syrup by Wholesome Sweetener Company. And it really tasted to me a little bit like a honey, like a lighter version of a honey, but you knew right away that it didn't have anything in there to thicken it because it's just that allulose was reduced down to make this liquid syrup. But yeah, how would you differentiate those?
Yeah, so with any of your sugar alcohols, you're going to get some aspect of a cooling effect on the tongue. That's just the nature of an ethanol based of a sugar alcohol. Just like if you were to put ethanol on your tongue, any alcohol is going to give you a cooling sensation as you drink it. So you do get that effect, and that can be a benefit or a negative. That's why we see xylitol used a lot in sugar-free mints and sugar-free gum, that especially in that are strongly peppermint flavor, that you get that nice cooling sensation that you would anticipate. But you don't necessarily want that cooling sensation when you're trying to eat a chocolate brownie.
Right.
So it's about creating that balance. So if you are seeing that cooling sensation, it might be time to just back down on the amount of erythritol that you're adding to your product.
Right, right. Good point. That's something that Ben always says, especially something like the confectioner style, like the powdered sugar style Swerve. When people use it in frosting, if they use the amount in their 1-to-1 ratio that they would normally use sugar or powdered sugar to make a icing or frosting, it has that real high cooling effect. And so he'll always instruct, use half of what it calls for so that you don't have that in something like icing where it's really concentrated too. So allulose to erythritol, they're both neutral. How's allulose different from it though?
So allulose is a sugar itself, where as opposed to erythritol is a sugar alcohol, and that's a very important aspect when we talk about the properties that the sugar provides. The erythritol is going to give you a little bit of upfront sweetness, so it's going to match sugar a little bit, whereas allulose is going to be much more neutral and it's not going to be as sweet. So you're going to get a little bit of the sweetness, but as you stated, it's going to give you especially if you're using the allulose syrup, you're going to get a honey-like flavor, um, and that's going to change the aspect of what you're trying to create. And so within that, it's really important that you balance. You want to make sure that the erythritol that you're using, because it's closer to a 1-to-1 and the allulose is a 1-to-1, that you're going to get slightly different properties. The allulose will crisp, whereas the erythritol, you might not get the same level of crispness if you're trying to create like a really crispy, crunchy cookie.
So with that, how is allulose similar to erythritol? How's it different?
So erythritol being a sugar alcohol, your body does not absorb it at all, and it only basically provides 0 calories. So it basically acts as a sugar-free sugar. Whereas the allulose, it does provide calories, but your body doesn't digest it. It's excreted in the urine, so you don't get the same added sugar factor from it.
but it's still chemically a sugar, so it's going to caramelize and crisp more like sugar, where that erythritol may not.
That is correct. Yes.
So you could almost, it seems like you could really do well with a blend of both.
Yeah, I think, and that's what you're seeing in industry. And even if you go to your local grocery store, you're not going to really see these one for one replacers like monk fruit, or you're going to see monk fruit with erythritol.
Yeah.
You're going to see erythritol and oligosaccharides like in Swerve. They're really trying to balance and give you the best mixture of everything.
So stevia, that kind of intense sweetness that's, as you said, like back forward. And then the erythritol, which is more neutral, the allulose, which is more neutral. But the allulose, as you said, it doesn't really hit our tongues quite as sweetly as erythritol does.
Right.
Okay.
And it comes down to the five basic tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter. And the erythritol, because of the shape of the molecule, it hits the tongue. We get that very sweet sensation. But allulose is a bigger molecule. It's considered a bulky molecule. And because of that, it's not hitting the taste receptors as much. So we're not getting that same sweetness flavor coming forward.
Wow. So it may still be hitting the sweet receptors. It's just bulkier, so it's not hitting them as intensely.
Correct.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. And then what would be the next one? So stevia, erythritol, allulose. What's kind of next on the level that we would look at?
I'd say next one is monk fruit. I'm personally not a big fan of it because I find it is very intense. But there's lots of people out there that are using it. There's great blends that have it in there where it's not as incredibly intense forward, but it's one of those very similar to stevia. It's going to be back heavy.
That's what I was about to ask. I perceive it as being very similar to stevia in the way that I feel like it kind of lingers. I would have maybe a hard time differentiating if a product was sweetened with stevia or with monk fruit, but I can pick up that it's one of those, but I may not know which one.
Yeah, and it really comes down to genetics. Some people are much more sensitive to stevia. Some people are going to be just as sensitive to monk fruit, and it's going to have it lead to a bitterness factor for them if they're consuming too much of it, and it's how it hits the receptors of the tongue.
You and I, some of the products that we sampled just now, most of them were powders, but there was actually two syrups. One was the allulose syrup, and then one was it's a simple syrup, like for drinks that you would use it in place of like zero proof cocktails or cocktails, as a simple syrup in place of the sugar one. And it was a monk fruit sweetened simple syrup. And we tasted the allulose first, and we, did our little shot of that. And it was, like we said, kind of a thinner honey, very, very neutral. And then I didn't even think to smell it. Of course, Darryl's like the food science person. He's like dotting things on his hand. He's licking the back of his hand. He's smelling everything. Like he's doing the whole sensory experience. And I'm just like, oh yeah, that's right. Like we need to like look at all the aspects. But as soon as we got the monk fruit sweetened simple syrup in that little shot glass, and before you even took a sip, I saw you smell it. And then I realized, wow, this one's intense. And I went back and smelled the allulose, and there was no scent to it. But the monk fruit even had a very strong aroma.
Yeah, and it pairs really well with citrus. So it's a great way if you're doing a sorbet or anything like that. It's a natural one for one, where it fits in nicely. But in other places where you don't want that necessarily that floral aroma, it can actually play a negative side of it.
Yeah, it's something to be aware of as you're experimenting with sweeteners. So if we're going to kind of the ones that we're seeing more on shelves, we would categorize, I guess, in the same way, stevia and monk fruit as those high intensity, lingering kind of sweeteners that people may perceive as, I'm not so sure about it because it kind of sticks with them for a little bit. And then erythritol and allulose would be the lower intensity that have a little bit more neutral.
Right.
And those are going to work better in baking because both of those, erythritol and allulose, are bulky. So they're going to provide the bulk that sugar does. And then allulose, as you said, because chemically it's a sugar, is going to help things crisp a little bit more or caramelize a little bit more. Erythritol does. It may not be as strong. Like if you're doing a cookie with erythritol, that's have this almond flour cookie, it isn't quite so crisp. So I wonder how it would be if I did halvesies, half erythritol, half allulose.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that companies are trying to find the ideal blend for each direct food source. And so what works for an ice cream won't necessarily work for a cookie, won't necessarily work for a snack cake. And so it's really about understanding the properties of each and finding the right blend for the right application.
So, as we said, you're not often going to see something that is just monk fruit sweetened because then it might be perceived as like too much. But you'll see these blends, blends in recipes that we can make at home, blends that are on the shelves. Like, so if you're buying monk fruit, it might not be just pure monk fruit, it's monk fruit and erythritol. And then companies, food makers are also using blends in there. What about fibers? Are there, I've read that chicory root and inulin, which have been around for a while as a way to make not healthy foods seem healthy. Like Fiber One bars are full of inulin, but they're not otherwise healthy. How much sweetness do those give to a product?
So some fibers, especially in their liquid form, can provide a small amount of sweetness. It is minute, but it is there. And so that can play a factor in what we're seeing if it's a powdered inulin as a carrier for something like monk fruit or stevia, then it can be synergistic and the sweetness is actually enhanced a little bit of the two combined. But really, what we see with inulins and some of the fibers is they're more there for the fiber and soluble fiber,
Hmm.
and not there necessarily there for the sweetness factor.
And they give a bulk also, or they're displacing what might otherwise be sugar or white flour.
Correct.
Yeah. So it ups the fiber count on the label. But we should also be very clear that if you're eating, your Fiber One bars and you're getting all your fiber for the day from inulin, which is just a white powder, it looks like, any other kind of, it looks like sweet and low. It's just kind
Right.
of this
Yeah.
fine white powder. It's not the same as if you had a fiber-rich diet full of vegetables and berries and everything else. Like you're not doing the same. So don't think that you're doing okay because you got your 20 grams of fiber from your Fiber One brownies or something. And then what's our end game with it? Because to that point of just because something has a lot of fiber in it or just because something is low in added sugar, that doesn't make a product healthy
Right. I
or
mean,
nutritious.
it's all about balance. So as I tell people, it's not. Don't be afraid to eat one cookie, but you don't necessarily have to eat the whole package.
Right.
And that's really where Americans and the American diet is we've gone to a state of excess. And so even if it's not 100% replacement of the sugar, but we're seeing a partial replacement of sugar with some of these sugar replacers, or you're replacing one aspect of your sugar-based diet with some of these sugar replacers, that it's all coming down to, at the end of the day, trying to eat a better and healthier diet than trying to make a change that's unsustainable.
And these products that are lower sugar can help us make it more sustainable. They can give us more options that are really easy at our fingertips. I think it's really important that, as you're looking at a product, you want to turn it over. And now, thankfully, we can see added sugar. But just because something has no added sugar and maybe the product next to it has 2 grams of added sugar, look and see what else is in there. What are the ingredients? How whole and unprocessed are those ingredients? If you're getting a whole lot of other real good stuff from this product, like there's other ingredients or other aspects of it that, wow, like I'm getting a lot of plant-based fats or something's got whatever it would be in it that are other key ingredients. Don't be driven just by that sugar count or the total carb count.
Yeah, it's really about, I think the big push that we're going to see with the reduced sugar diets is also tied into the whole foods diet, where you're really trying to eat the whole food, not just the bits and pieces from it.
Exactly, exactly. So, just like I go back to the Fiber One bars because they're kind of easy to pick on, but the foods they're not, there's ice creams it's just ice cream and they're just adding fiber to it, or it's just a candy bar, essentially. They're adding fiber. That doesn't make it healthy. And on the same note, just because that cookie has zero sugar now also doesn't make that particularly nutritious, So looking to see what else is in there, what else is it giving me? Um, Added sugars, not our end game, but it is one element to look at. Reading the ingredient list, not just going by the numbers, but like what are the ingredients in there? And as you heard Darryl and I both say, like just because you might not be familiar with something doesn't mean it's bad. And so if you see an ingredient that you're not familiar with, like I said, I'll link to the website I was telling y'all about, chemicalcuisine.org. And that is such a good resource just for consumers that if you're like, what is this? And I mean, I've done that for ingredients that I'll see in like crawfish boil blends, the liquid boils. There's things that I'm like, I don't even know what this is. I'll go and I'll look and sure enough, I'll be able to find it. And okay, well, it didn't sound familiar, but it's actually completely harmless. Or wait, no, like I'm going to not opt for that product because this is in there. So we can help educate ourselves. So bottom line, companies are at least trying.
Yes, companies really want to do right by the consumers. I mean, at the end of the day, they are in business and they're there to make a profit, but it comes down to they're going to make what the customer demands.
So they're making it easier than ever for us to reach for these low added sugar and no added sugar options. And as we said, you'll often see a blend of multiple sweeteners in there. Again, we emphasize look for those plant-based zero-calorie options, the things with erythritol or allulose or stevia or monk fruit. Still steering clear of the artificials, the saccharin, the sucralose, the acesulfame potassium, the aspartame, and read those labels. And we can't assume that just because it doesn't taste sweet that it doesn't have something else in there. So educating yourself, turning those packages over.
Yeah, it really comes down to at the end of the day, it's all about education. And that's really why we're here, not just trying to at the University of Holy Cross, not just trying to educate our students, but trying to educate the public as well.
And try some of these products. You may think, I don't know about that. Like, give it a try, and you may not love it, but maybe every time you're going to the store, if you've got like your usual things that you're buying that are kind of filling your pantry that aren't the best, whether it's the cookies or whatever's in your freezer, your ice cream or whatever, trying a new one and just branching out a little bit. We get so in a rut, in a routine of the same thing because that's what we always get. Give yourself some time at the store and start to see like what are some of the other options because they're more and more they're going to be coming out. Any last big takeaway for us?
I would say if you don't like it the first time, don't be afraid to try it a second time or a third time because some of these are going to have to develop the appreciation for because they're not going to be the exact same as the 100% sugar options.
You're so right. I have, there's only a handful of higher protein cereals that are actually truly higher protein and otherwise good ingredients. And I can't tell you how many clients would be like, they would like call me after that first bowl of that cereal, Molly, like I'm throwing this away, or it tastes like they hate it. And then by the time they come back for their next follow up, I'd be like, okay, so we've got to find another replacer. Like you hated the cereal. Oh no, I like it. By the time they like had their third or fourth bowl, it wasn't what they had. It wasn't what they were replacing it with. But then once they actually started like appreciating it for what it was, it's all about managing your expectations.
Exactly.
It's like the Eat Fit King Cake. We tell people, don't go into it thinking it's your favorite local bakery king cake. It is a king cake. It's a pound cake. It's zero sugar. Like manage your expectations. So grateful for your time for this. I will include the links that we've talked about. And I'll also include a link to Holy Cross so we can see what you guys are doing with the food science department, what you are doing with the students, providing that education and all of what you're doing and giving back to the community as well.
Great. We're happy to be here.
A tremendous thank you to Darryl for joining us today. I always have a blast with him. I always learn from him, and I'm grateful for him carving out that time and just sharing all the stuff that's in his brain and translating it into easy to understand content for us. I'll include the links that we mentioned in the show notes of this episode, and let me know what you think. As always, if you play around with some of these sweeteners, if you do your own taste tests, if you're experimenting with them in different baking, different recipes, I want to know about it. So keep me posted. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.